Hello everybody and welcome back to a new video. My name is Sarah and today I'm doing both my June and July wrap up. In June I read 6 books and in July I only read 3, and the reason why I only read 3 and the reason why I didn't get my June wrap up up in the beginning of July is because I went on vacation, like kind of like a family reunion thing in New Mexico during like the first week of July, and then I got COVID and so I was just super sick, super like tired, and just couldn't like get anything done. So now we're combining the 2 months since I realized pretty quick in July that I was not going to get nearly as many books as I normally read done. Obviously, you know, 3 is like half of what I normally read. So we're combining the months. So I have 9 books to talk about in this wrap up, and because of that I'm going to try to go kind of fast through them because, you know, I ramble a lot. So the first book that I read in June was The Historian by Elizabeth Kostovo, and unfortunately I did not like this book. I'm really sad about it because it sounded like a really fun premise and something that I would really enjoy. So basically in the story we're following 3 different generations all looking for the actual tomb of Dracula or Vlad the Impaler. So it's really steeped in this sense of like dusty libraries and academic research and traveling all over Eastern Europe. And while I really liked the kind of vibes of this story, like it was enjoyable in that sense and the atmosphere, and Kostovo does a brilliant job like really describing all of these Eastern European cities and villages, and you really get like a strong sense of wanderlust with it. I was really bored through almost the entirety of this book. We're following our main character, and she's like a young woman. We're basically learning from her perspective as she's told the story by her father about his like professor's journey to look for Vlad the Impaler, and then her father then tells her his journey to look for Vlad the Impaler's tomb, and then we're finally caught up to present day. This story within a story within a story idea and concept and structure is cool, and it like would work well if this wasn't meant to be like a thriller. And because of the story within a story within a story and how slow it like takes to actually get anywhere in the book, it really like took the thrill out of the thriller aspect and made it really boring. And then on top of that, like I said, I did really enjoy all of the detail that we get of like the scenery, but when you add all of that like time taken to describe the details, it then makes the book even slower, and I just really lost interest in this story. Another thing is that we spend like 500 plus pages to like building up to this big final scene, and then the final scene is just like breezed right through. And when I was reading it, I like got to the end of that scene and I'm like, wait, that's it? Like, when you spent all of this like time and like painstakingly detailed all of this other stuff that was going on, but when we got to like the final big scene, it just like it was very lackluster and I was disappointed. So unfortunately I did give this 2 stars. After that I picked up a manga. I picked up my first Junji Ito manga, and it is Venus in the Blind Spot. This is a short story collection. So Junji Ito is known for his horror manga, and I think that, like, objectively, this was good. It's just not for me. Obviously, I love the art style, and I loved, like, just the creepiness of it, and there were some, like, objectively really good short stories in here. I just don't really like horror in the short story format, and then when you put it into the manga format, I think it just like I lose a sense of like intensity and like the buildup of dread in it because we're going so fast through the story because it's so short. And so because of that, like I really don't know how to rate this, and so on Goodreads I did leave it unrated. I don't know if I will continue to pick up any of Junji Ichi's works. I might try one of his longer works, since like I said, this is a compilation of short stories, but I just don't think the short story manga format is for me. If that is something that you like, I would recommend picking this up. There were a couple of short stories where I was just like, I could tell I was like, this isn't super good. Like, the art style is obviously phenomenal, but I was just like, this is kind of like a lackluster short story. But there were others that I could tell, like, I did enjoy them. It's just, it didn't hit as hard as I was wanting it to. So the next in June, I read For the Throne by Hannah Wynne. This is the second book in the World of Word duology, so it's the finale of this duology, and I buddy read this with my friend Rachel. We had buddy read For the Wolf, and really had a lot of fun with that when that first came out, and so we had decided that we definitely needed to buddy read this one, and I really enjoyed the buddy reading experience. I just had a lot of fun with it. However, this book didn't meet the kind of expectations that For the Wolf had set for it, which was rather unfortunate. Obviously, I can't really talk about what this one is about. So in For the Wolf, we're in this kingdom where there's like a saying, the first daughter is for the throne, the second is for the wolf. So then we are following twin sisters, Red and Nev. Nev is the oldest daughter, so she is set to be queen, and Red is then obviously the youngest daughter, so she is set to be kind of the sacrificial lamb sent into the Wilderwood for the wolf, to hopefully appease him and have him release the gods back to the world. Then obviously once Red gets into the Wilderwood, she realizes the wolf and the whole scenario behind why she's there is not at all what she was told. And so the first book, For the Wolf, is definitely Red's book. Like, we follow Nev's perspective as well in like these little interlude chapters, but we're really following Red's journey. And so then in this book, we are definitely following Nev's perspective and her journey. So I did really enjoy this ongoing metaphor that was happening definitely throughout this book of like mirrors and like the twins having to mirror each other in their journeys. I thought that in some aspects it was pulled off really well, particularly like in the journey aspect and like the transformation that both of the sisters go through. However, in other aspects, I didn't think that it was done very well. It felt very forced, particularly in the romance side of things. The romantic relationship in this book did not feel as like natural as it did in the first book. And so that was kind of like frustrating and disappointing, because as much as like I wanted to root for the relationship, it felt very stilted, and just very forced. I said this about the first book, and I can like definitely hands down loved it about this second book, is Hannah Wynne's writing style is just absolutely gorgeous. Her imagery, like in the first book, was beautiful, but it like really blew me away in this second one. We are in like a completely different setting in this second book, and I just really enjoyed like the creepy folkloric feel. Not to mention there was just some really gorgeous scenes. The other thing though that was kind of disappointing about this book is that there were a couple of parts at the end that felt like Witten didn't really know how to go about tying up. Like, she knew what she wanted to have done, but she didn't really know like how to go about it. And so those moments felt kind of like underdeveloped and kind of forced as well, and they just didn't feel like it should have happened the way that it did. Overall, I don't think that this was a bad end to the duology. Like, I do think it has a lot of really strong points. I just was disappointed that it didn't live up to how great I thought the first one was. So in Goodreads, I did end up giving this one 4 stars. Looking back on it, I really don't know if I would continue to like keep it rated that high. I don't normally go back and change my ratings, but I feel like it's more of like a 3.5, just because it didn't like stick with me as much as the first one did. So then after that, I read Seasonal Fears by Seanan McGuire. This is the second book in the Alchemical Journeys series. It's the sequel to Middle Game, which was one of my favorite books that I read so far this year. However, this one was a huge disappointment. It wasn't bad, but it was nowhere near where the first one was. Kind of similar to how I felt about For the Throne, but like take it up a couple of notches. I don't know, I was just really disappointed in this one. In this one, we are following a like high school sweetheart couple, and they are kind of the in the running in this competition to be the personification of winter and summer. I have two really big complaints. First, what I really loved about Middle Game was our relationship between Roger and Dodger. I think McGuire writes sibling relationships incredibly well. They just felt super easy to root for, and their relationship felt very complex and nuanced. However, romantic relationships, I just don't think McGuire can write them very well. At least this romantic relationship was like, I didn't buy it. I didn't like care. I didn't like the relationship. It just, you know, I didn't feel anything, and they kind of actually just frustrated me. So like that was a big part where I was like frustrated with, and it lost a lot of its appeal that like Middle Game had. Another part is I felt like this book was very, very repetitive. I felt like some of the same conversations between different characters, and even sometimes the same characters, happened over and over and over and over again, and I'm like, I get the idea of like, you know, characters being in denial and needed to have things like explained or like reiterated to them maybe a couple times, but it was like so many times I was like, okay, can we please move on? Like we could have like combined 3 of these conversations into one and like been done with it. I did enjoy like the concept of the story. However, I feel like this coming after how broad of a scope and like how intense Middle Game was, this was on a much, I guess, smaller scale in terms of like world-shattering events, that it kind of did a disservice to this story. This almost should have come before Middle Game. Again, this is like a similar thing with For the Wolf, where I rated this like 3 stars in Goodreads, but honestly I think it should be brought down to a 2. Will I go back and update my rating? I don't know, but overall, like, I just was really kind of disappointed in this one. So then after that, or kind of like during the same time, I was listening to the audiobook of Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is Chanel Miller's memoir. She was, and I hate to like explain it this way, because she's much more than just the victim, but she was the victim in the Brock Turner rape case. Brock Turner was the Stanford swimmer that was convicted of rape but only sentenced to 6 months in county jail. And this memoir like floored me. This was hands down one of the best books that I have read this year. I think that everybody needs to read this book. It is incredibly hard to get through, so I think you need to be like in a good spot in your life to read it, but I think it is so important. I cried so many times while listening to this. Luckily, I didn't like listen to it in public. I was home, like, you know, cleaning or whatever for most of the time that I was listening to it, because it just caught me off guard several times of like moments where it just got really emotional. Obviously the whole book is very emotional because it deals with a very heavy topic, but I was just so impressed and heartbroken. We kind of follow her of like the night of the rape and then all leading up through the leading up to the trial, through the trial, and even past that. And Chanel takes us through this whole situation, explaining how the trauma doesn't just end with like the night of the rape. The whole trial process is extremely traumatic as well for rape victims. It's set up against victims. There's a lot of victim blaming that goes on. She talked a lot about how she was put in a position where she suddenly was scrutinizing every move that she made during that night, obviously because she was being questioned about it, but every move that she made going forward in her life, about how her decisions, while they could seem very like neutral or just normal decisions, could be used against her just in any scenario. And it was just really heartbreaking. Chanel's writing is so incredibly powerful, and I highly recommend listening to the audiobook because Chanel narrates it herself, and her voice and kind of just how she tells us this story just adds so much more power to her words. Obviously, I think it goes without saying that I gave this 5 stars, and I just think this is an incredibly important book that people need to read in order to just understand the victim's perspective in these types of situations. And then the final book that I read in June was Your House is on Fire, Your Children All Gone by Stefan Keesby. This is a very short horror book. It is just under 200 pages. And this is so unsettling and it made me so uncomfortable. We are in this like isolated German town in the 1940s, 50s, and we're following these 4 children as they grow up in this very secluded small town. And we quickly learn that there are many events that happen throughout the youth of these 4 people that the town is just kind of like, oh yeah, that's a thing that just like happened and it's like normal, right? And you're just like, no, that's not normal. Should probably all be like arrested, or it was nuts. It was nuts. And if you want to read about child sociopaths, this is the book to pick up. What's really interesting and that makes this even more unsettling is that it is told in such like a detached, clinical manner that you're just like, what is wrong with these people? There's a severe like lack of emotion, and I think it just adds to like the atmosphere and the creepiness of this story. I can also see where like people wouldn't like that because they would like feel detached from the story and themselves, but because it's so short, I think that it works very well with this. Each chapter is just like following one of the 4 kids' perspectives at a different point throughout like their lives, and this town is messed up. This town is very messed up. It reminds me of The Devil All the Time because they're both like following multiple perspectives of like these very troubled people in this small secluded town, and so I think if you liked The Devil All the Time, I think you will like this one as well, and I did give it 4 stars. And then in July, the first book that I picked up was Beautiful Nightmares by KJ Sutton. This is the 4th book in the Fortuna Sworn series. It's the most recent one. There's set to be 7 books in this series, and unfortunately this was my least favorite out of the 4 that have come out so far, and it was also the longest of the 4. I kind of wonder if part of the reason why I didn't enjoy it as much as I have the other ones is because I had COVID through the majority of reading the book. So then, you know, as always, since this is the 4th book, I can't tell you what this one is about, but the first book in the series, Fortuna Sworn, we are following Fortuna Sworn. She is a nightmare, meaning that if she touches anybody or has like some sort of physical contact with them, she can sense their fears and then kind of make these hallucinations or illusions so that they are experiencing those fears. And she is the last of her kind, and a couple years ago her brother went missing, and so she's been searching for him and is now coming up with dead ends, and suddenly a Fey man appears and says that he knows where her brother is and will help her find him, and yeah, like get him out of whatever situation he's in, if she agrees to marry him. And that's where the first book starts off. Obviously now we are at the fourth book, and while this was a long book, it felt like not a lot happened. I mean, obviously there was a lot going on, but it just, for whatever reason, it felt like we weren't really getting anywhere with the story. I don't know. And like I said, this might just be because I was sick while I was reading it. I can't really tell. I also just didn't like where Fortuna's relationship went with one other character, because it just created, it like solidified this love triangle. So usually I hate love triangles, but I was like not too terribly upset with the love triangle that was in this story. I actually kind of liked how it was set up. However, when during this book, I just was like, ugh, no, I didn't like it. I liked the friendship that Fortuna had with this one character, and when it just turned into like a romantic thing, I was just like, this isn't necessary, we don't need it. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of people disagree with me, but that's just like a personal thing. I did like where like the dreamscape side of the story was going. There's kind of like two different parts to this whole series. There's like what's happening when Fortuna's awake, but then there's also a dreamscape side of like subplot of the story, and I was really interested where it was going with this book. But then once we really got into it, it became very repetitive, and I understand why. It made sense that it was repetitive, but when the outcome of each like repetition of whatever like general event was happening didn't feel as, I guess, rewarding as I wanted it to, it just got kind of frustrating. There's like, you know, the big oh my gosh moment at the end of this book, and it didn't feel as like surprising as some of the other holy shit moments in the past 3 books. It felt very obvious that this is where it was going throughout this whole book, and it was also frustrating that I was like, Fortuna, it's literally all right there. Like, you have all the same information that I have. Why are you not putting this together? Like, it's very obvious. And so that got really frustrating because she's not a stupid character. I don't know, it just felt too obvious to me, and obviously I'm going to continue the series. I just think that this one was kind of like a slumpy book in the series. I did end up giving it 3 stars because it wasn't horrible. There were very many aspects that I did enjoy. Obviously I love Fortuna as a character, and I love kind of like a lot of the discoveries that were made in this book and the implications that it's leading towards for the rest of the series, but I don't know, we'll see. So then after that, I read All's Well by Mona Awad, and I have no idea what you would classify this book as. This book is a wild ride. So we are following a woman who is a director of a college theater program. She was like a starlet of theater. She had a terrible accident and is now injured and has severe chronic pain. So her acting career is over, so she's now a director of theater, and she wants to put on Shakespeare's All's Well That Ends Well, but she's dealing with a cast that is rebellious and mutinous because they want to put on Macbeth instead. And so she is not only fighting with her chronic pain, but she's fighting with a cast that has like zero respect for her. And one day she meets these 3 men that kind of tell her that they can fix all of her problems. And it just goes off in this wild ride from there. This this book, from page 1, you are incredibly entrenched in our main character's pain. I was so impressed with how Awad was able to just like sink the reader into our main character's like life and feelings and emotions. Awad has a very interesting and kind of unique writing style where it's very fever dream-esque. It's very almost unhinged. At times as this book progresses it gets more and more unhinged, but you just have this feeling of just like lead weights on your ankles as you're trying to trudge up this ever growing mountain of insurmountable pain, and then suddenly like a switch flips and you're suddenly like just like soaring through the clouds, like just on cloud 9. It's so hard to describe unless you like read the book, but like the emotional like whiplash that you get in this story of like how you feel with the main character is insane. We have like an unreliable narrator because as you progress through the story you're like, what is actually happening, and how much of this is like showcased as it's actually happening and how much of it is just like this warped perception of our main character. But it definitely discusses a lot about how the invisibility of chronic pain that many women deal with is not taken seriously, and like people just don't believe women when they say they're in pain, but nobody can figure out why, and so they're just like, oh, it's all in your head, oh, you're just perpetuating this because you know you want attention, or you know you are a hypochondriac or whatever, when in reality it's like, no, there's something wrong, it's just nobody can figure it out. And I think that Awad tackled this really well. I don't know, I there's not really much more I can say about this book without like spoiling it. I'm gonna be honest, it feels like there's not a lot that happens plot-wise, but there's a lot that happens to this character. But I think if you liked Bunny by Mona Awad, I think that you will really like this one because it has that same like just weird fever dream feel to almost the entirety of the book once it really gets going. But I did give this 4 stars. And then lastly in July I read The Hodkin by Josiah Bancroft. This is the 3rd book in the Books of Babel quartet. I'm also realizing I think it's pronounced Babel. Everybody pronounces the R.F. Kuang book that's coming out called, I call it Babel. Everybody else is calling it Babel. So if I'm pronouncing this wrong, somebody let me know. I don't know why I always thought it was Babel. Like, how do you pronounce that word? Anyway, so this is the 3rd book. There's 4 books total. In the 1st book, Senlin Ascends, we are following Thomas Senlin, who is the headmaster of this little school village, and he's just recently gotten married, and so him and his wife are on their honeymoon to the Tower of Babel. We're just gonna go with Babel. And this tower is supposed to be like the epitome of human ingenuity. It's like this huge, like massive construct. You can't even see the top of it. And each floor is like its own separate city. They're called ringdoms, and they're each like wildly different in terms of like culture and political machinations and everything. They're all each completely unique to each other, and there's like this like giant sprawling market all around the outside of the tower. This place, it is like a maze, and it is, once you lose someone, it's impossible to find them. And of course, Thomas loses his wife, and so then he has to go on this journey through the tower looking for his wife and trying to reunite with her. This series is so much fun. The way I've described this series before is that if you take Bilbo Baggins and you drop him in Steampunk Alice in Wonderland, you will get the Books of Babel quartet. That still holds true in this book. This series is very whimsical and obviously, like I said, steampunk-esque. It is full of like different political machinations and just wild adventures. You've got this very found family feel for this group of characters that we've traveled with now through 3 books, and it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this one. We get a lot more of like the political maneuverings in this story, and we get less of the whimsical feel, and so I definitely still think that the second book is my favorite because I think that it has a perfect mix of like the just wild whimsy and plot forward movement and political forward movement, whereas in this one the political machinations and the plot movement takes precedence and the whimsy kind of goes on the background. It's not a bad thing, it's still very kind of fantastical. And one thing that's really interesting is in this one, so our characters are all kind of split apart now, and we're following kind of three different perspectives. One perspective kind of has the perspective of two characters, and then the other two are just focused on like one. And what's interesting is we're not told these perspectives of like, you know, you follow one character and then you follow the next one during like the same time, and then the next chapter you follow the next one during the same time. It's split into sections where like the part one, we're following one character through this whole like chunk of time, and then part two we go back to the beginning and we follow, well, beginning of this book, and we follow the other set of characters through this whole chunk of time. And then part three, we go back again and we follow the character through this whole chunk of time. You would think like because some of the characters have overlap and like you're seeing the same events happen in some aspects, and you know, much of it is very new events, but you would think that that would get boring or frustrating because you're like seeing the same timeline happen just from different perspectives, but it's not. It's so fun, and Bancroft pulled it off so well where it still feels very fresh and new each time you go back and start the timeline over again. And I was just really impressed with how Bancroft decided to organize this book, because I thought that it was done really well and really fun. I am very, very scared to pick up the final book, and it has been a while where I've read a series and like I'm so excited to see what happens, yet I'm so scared for the series to end. You know, obviously if I'm gonna continue a series, it's because I'm excited to see where the story goes and see where these characters kind of go in their journey, but it's been a long time since I've been afraid to finish a story because I'm not ready to leave this world and these characters. But that's the case with this series. I'm just not ready to say goodbye yet because I'm having so much fun with it, and I think that just says a lot about the quality and my enjoyment of this story. I did end up giving this one 4 stars just because, like I said, the second one is still my favorite, but this one was still a lot of fun. So these 7 books plus Know My Name plus Beautiful Nightmares are the books that I read during June and July. Luckily, I am, you know, obviously very COVID free, but I am out of the reading slump that I was in July, so full steam ahead, very excited. I don't think June and July were horrible reading months. I had a couple of really big hits, but there was some like pretty big disappointments in those 2 months as well, so hopefully August we will have more hits and less disappointments. But anyway, if you've read any of those books or you're looking to read any of them, obviously let me know down in the comments. I always love to hear from you guys. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you consider sticking around and subscribing if you haven't already. But I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!